Hi, everybody. We welcome you this morning. Thank you so much. This is Tim Andersen, the appraiser's advocate. We like to talk with the folks who are influential in the real estate appraisal business. And we have one such person here with us this morning. We've got Mr. Craig Morley, state certified general real estate appraiser in 3 states, former chair of the Utah State Appraisal Board, a former president of the National Association of Appraisers, former chair of the appraisal section of NAR, and a sitting member of the ASB. Now, with all those qualifications, everybody has to understand that Craig is not here representing any of those. Craig is here this morning to talk with us and answer our questions as just plain old everyday Craig. And as I say, he's a state certified general real estate appraiser in 3 states. So he's got a clue of what's going on. And so that's why we're interviewing him, so you can benefit from his wisdom. Craig, how are you this morning?
I'm doing very well, Tim. Getting
You,
up in the mountains and out of the heat. So,
I was going to say, it looks like where you are, it might be a bit brisk as we record this.
yeah, when I left my home in St. George, it was 108. And this morning it's in the mid 30s. And so we went up to Bryan Head, Utah with a base elevation of 9,500 feet. So that extra, 7,000 or 8,000 feet makes a difference on the temperature.
Yeah, and being that high, you can almost breathe, right?
As long as I don't have to do stairs, I'm okay.
Okay. All right. When my wife and I go out west into the mountains, because we're like 12 feet above sea level where we are, we have trouble breathing for a few days. But
Yeah, it takes a bit. And you kind of have to prepare yourself, because altitude sickness is a real thing, and if you're not ready for it, it'll make you feel bad.
yeah, it'll put you down for a couple of days. Well, Craig, we're as we record this, we're toward the middle of 2022. We're getting we've had a lot of changes going on in the last 12 months, last 6 months too. So let's start out with this podcast discussing discussing desktop appraisals, which some people call hybrids, even though that's not what they are, versus a regular appraisal. And by regular appraisal, there's no definition for a regular appraisal, but I mean what appraisers are accustomed to doing when it comes to GSE work. And then, even more important, as we look at clients requesting desktops and sometimes hybrids where they provide us with third-party data, are there times when we should walk away from those assignments?
Yes, this is an evolving level of service that many of our lender clients want from appraisers. And it's critical for appraisers to know when not to accept the assignment, or when to change the scope of work so that you can complete the assignment and not run into a problem. I think I may have mentioned to you, we had an appraiser in Utah who had been engaged by the AMC to perform a desktop appraisal. There had been some information provided to the appraiser from a third-party data collector, and there was a conflict in the data with what the public record showed, and it was a significant conflict. And the appraiser calls him and says, "Listen, I just can't complete this. The information is inconsistent, and I don't have any confidence in it." And they cajoled him into completing the assignment anyway. And it turns out that there was a major conflict. In fact, the property that was provided by the data collector was wrong, and the appraiser ended up getting sanctioned. And the issue is well, I just relied on the information that was provided by the third party. How can I be held accountable for that? And ultimately, the problem is that in performing any assignment, the information that I obtain from any third party, I have to have a reason to believe that it's accurate. And if I don't have a reason to believe that it's not accurate, then I either need to decline the assignment or do something to be able to complete it in a credible manner. And because of the pressure that he had received from his from the AMC, he performed the assignment not having reconciled that problem, and it ended up being a bigger problem for him. And so I think, as we look at these, there's nothing that prohibits us from doing these kinds of assignments, but it becomes critical that we make sure that the information we've got is believable. And from my personal perspective, if the information that I'm getting is consistent with prior listings and MLS data and public records, then I've got a reason to believe that the information I've got is credible. If I start finding conflicts in that data, then I believe I have an obligation to either resolve the conflict or decline the assignment. And sometimes it's just a situation where you say, you know what, I'm going to have to go look at this property. So if you're not willing to expand the scope of work, I'm just not going to do the assignment. It just doesn't make sense for me to do it. And so I think that's where we've got to have the backbone to make sure that we are doing these things in a way that results in, the USPAP language is a credible assignment result.
Craig, from a standpoint of third-party contractors and the appraiser, the particular appraiser you were talking about using as his defense, the issue of, it's somebody else's data. All I did was rely on it. Therefore, how can I be held responsible for it? But yet appraisers have always been responsible for third-party data because the MLS is a source of third-party data, is it not?
Yes, and I think that's been kind of the issue that we come into. We find ourselves in a situation where the appraiser wants to make an extraordinary assumption about the data provided by the third-party data collector, but we don't take a second thought about using the data that we got from the MLS or from county records. We just use that without question. And what we find is that the GSEs won't accept an appraisal with an extraordinary assumption. There's you got to resolve if I use an extraordinary assumption when there's a conflict and say, I'm not sure what the right answer is, but I'm making the extraordinary assumption. I believe that this assumption I'm making is correct. But if it's not, then then my assignment results may change or may not be reliable. And the GSEs are going, we don't want, if we've got that kind of requirement, we can't accept and sell that in the secondary market. And so I think sometimes we forget when we're dealing with these kinds of issues that an extraordinary assumption is property specific. And it might be an issue with zoning. It might be an issue with other kinds of related issues where soil or something like that. In our area, we have places where they've got a bentonite blue clay, and if it gets wet, it expands, and it's remarkable the amount of lifting capacity that soil has. And so if I'm appraising a home in an area where this blue soil is known to exist, and I'm aware that homes in the area from time to time have suffered structural damage as a result of improper engineering for that soil, then I might disclose to my client, hey, I didn't observe anything that leads me to believe that there's a problem with this property, but I'm in an area that has this kind of soil characteristic. You need to be aware of that. And if you're concerned about the structural stability of the home, you may want to further investigate, have engineering work to determine that that the property is structurally sound. I didn't see anything. It looks fine, but and so there's a variety of different places where assumptions and extraordinary assumptions are useful and ought to be used, but the GSEs don't want them. And so I think as you look at the canned certifications used on the residential form, there's already a general assumption about the reliability of the data. You don't need an extraordinary assumption, provided you believe that the data you've got is accurate. But I think we're a little nervous about getting this data. We're so kind of tied to the collection of the property data for your subject property from our own personal observations that it's kind of uncomfortable to get this from somebody else. And you hear stories about somebody getting information from somebody else that ends up being wrong, and you get in trouble. It further, makes us uncomfortable because of that. But if we use good judgment, I think you can do these without it being the kind of extreme exposure to additional risk that as long as you're taking at least some reasonable efforts to verify and make sure that the information you've got is reasonably correct.
Okay, let me follow up on that. Now, you said that the desktop appraisal form, the 1004 version of the desktop appraisal, has language changes in it already that basically say the appraiser had to depend on third-party data. So the appraiser doesn't need to have an extraordinary assumption that the data provided by a third-party contractor is indeed accurate. Now, from a standpoint of covering one's assets, is that disclaimer going to cover one's assets if, for example, as you pointed out, the third-party contractor just flat got it wrong? Or will that pre-printed language cover the appraiser's assets and therefore provide a modicum of protection against either being sued or being hauled up in front of a state board?
Well, there's two elements that I think we ought to consider. The first is, did I have a reason to believe the information is correct? And if there's no conflicts with the information that I've got between other sources, I think it would be pretty hard to hold someone accountable for information that had every appearance of being correct. In the illustration I'd used before, there was a major conflict, and the appraiser proceeded anyway with the information provided that was inconsistent with public record and prior MLS data, which is the reason why the appraiser found themselves in trouble. I think the other thing that I would do is make sure that if I need to provide either a clarification or an expanded scope of work, I can go in and say, listen, these are the steps that I took to verify the information. And having taken those steps, I looked at the public records, I looked at prior MLS, I got information from third parties. It all looked to be consistent. I was able to review photos, prior photos, and I developed my opinions and conclusions based on this information. I think that you can do that and have a reasonable degree of confidence that you're going to be okay, because I don't believe any board is going to hold you accountable for something that you had no reason to know there was something wrong with. But I think if we get sloppy or we get in a big hurry and we don't verify that data, it is where you are more likely to find yourself having a problem.
Okay, let's back up even one more time. And let's go back to this appraiser who accepted these third-party data, despite the fact that it turned out to be really wrong. So if I understand correctly what you're saying the appraiser, in accepting this third-party data, that was not the issue. That was not the what our legal friends called the gravamen. That was not the case. Didn't rotate on that axis. But what the axis on which it rotated was not the quality of the appraiser's data, but was the fact that the appraiser failed to engage in the due diligence to overcome that problem when it was obvious to the appraiser that this conflict between the square footages from the contractor and the local county authorities was so big that that should have raised red flags and the appraiser should have engaged in greater due diligence. So the issue was not the use of the third-party contractor data. The issue was failing to engage in proper due diligence because it was obvious the data were incorrect. Have I interpreted this properly?
Yes, that's exactly and that's how the board came down on the issue, is that it wasn't that you'd use third party data. It's that you knew there was a conflict and you used it anyway. And that was the problem.
Okay, so again, the problem was not the use of third-party data. The problem was negligence, basically, because the appraiser did not follow up, did not verify all of the necessary data for credible assignment results. All right, let me. You mentioned the concept of scope of work 2 or 3 times, and you talked about expanding the scope of work. Now, let's look at it from the other standpoint. I have read articles recently in which a desktop appraisal, a hybrid appraisal, is called a limited scope assignment. And that limitation is the appraiser does not put boots in the living room. The appraiser doesn't drive by. The appraiser basically doesn't come out of his or her basement uh, bathed in the warm glow of the computer screen to inspect that property. Therefore, that portion of a typical scope of work is no longer there. Therefore, this type of appraisal is a limited scope appraisal report, or limited scope appraisal. Now, in 2006, the ASB, of which you were not a member at the time, did away with departure. And departure basically said if you have to do something that is atypical, either it's atypical because you included it or it's atypical because you excluded it, you have engaged in departure. Are we getting back into the concept of departure, or is this just a milestone along the appraisal highway?
It's probably a milestone along the appraisal highway. Realistically, I think and the limited scope is kind of a fuzzy way to describe what's going on. You're simply realistically just saying, listen, I've got an assignment that has been given and with a problem to solve. My problem to solve is the market value. Presumably it's the market value of the property. And my client has said that they are willing to allow me to develop the physical characteristics of my subject property based on information provided by some other source other than my personal observations. And they don't require me to go out and physically inspect the comparable sales. Presumably, I have the competency in that market area to have enough knowledge to understand the neighborhoods in which those comparable sales are located. And so I can competently complete that assignment. And so I can call it a limited scope, but essentially it's still just a scope of work. And my scope of work is not what we would traditionally look at in your typical 1004 MC. And so I think the reality is that we have the obligation to describe what we did to obtain the information about the subject property, to be able to determine the relevant physical characteristics that are going to affect the value of the property. I obtained that somehow. I need to tell them how I got that. And if I can't reliably get that information, then I shouldn't complete the assignment. If I've got pretty good data, do I have to physically inspect the property? No, I probably don't. If I don't have pretty good data and I'm not sure, then I'm either making extraordinary assumptions, which the GSEs won't let me do, or I've got to go out and get enough information so that I feel like I can complete the assignment properly. I think the other thing to keep in mind, Tim, is that desktop appraisals have been around for a long time. It's a relatively new thing for the GSEs, but we've had desktop appraisals going on for a very long time. And not all desktop appraisals are created equal, either in the scope of work or in the way that those assignment results are reported. And one of the biggest problems that I see is that we have a lot of your lenders who are making home equity loans or whatever kind of loan they're making. And oftentimes, rather than get an quote, an evaluation, they want an appraisal done, but we're going to come up with a scope of work that is very limited. They might even allow the use of an extraordinary assumption. They'll provide you with a couple of pictures that somebody had taken from, could be a cab. I mean, who knows? But they'll send you some pictures of the property. They expect you to look at the public record data, MLS data, and develop an opinion based on that information. And the biggest problem I've seen with those kinds of assignments is that the reporting formats that they want you to convey your assignment results on oftentimes require significant enhancement in order to meet the reporting standards under USPAP. And so, if the GSE stuff, you still have the same obligation, but the scope is pretty well set. When I start doing non-GSE desktop appraisals, I have to be exceptionally careful to make sure that I've done all of the stuff with standard one. There's no shortcuts there. And in accordance with the scope of work that I've agreed to and that I've essentially established, and that I've communicated those assignment results, and it could be a restricted appraisal. I may not have to go into the same detail that I would on an appraisal report, but I have to make sure that all of my reporting standards are being complied with and met, including highest and best use and some of those kinds of things that sometimes get overlooked. And that's where I see appraisers getting into trouble, is that we far too frequently think the form is what makes us compliant with USPAP, and appraisers comply with USPAP, forms don't. And if the form is deficient and I can't add to, and I've seen some of these online forms where you don't have the ability to alter or to expand, to add things like prior sales, listing histories, some of the elements of a certification that may not be in the form that's been developed. The other element is, if I'm doing an online form, how do I comply with my record keeping rule? Do I have access to that for the required period of time? Do I have all of my research and data that I had provided in developing my conclusions in standard one? If those things aren't there, or I can't do that, and some of these don't. I mean, I've seen a number of these where you simply, with what they provide, you can't do it. And so, that's where I think we have to be careful. I think the GSE work is more likely to be, I don't know, less risky than some of these other products that you see where people are trying to get these things done fast and cheap, and they don't want you to put much effort into it. And as a result, the possibility that you're going to make a mistake or an omission is much higher.
All right. I want to get into the concept of skill sets, but before we do, let me ask you one more question on this. To your knowledge, are state appraisal boards specifically targeting desktop or hybrid appraisals so that they can sanction these appraisers and thereby send a message to the GSEs that they should not be asking for such appraisals and reports?
No, most of the states that I have any interaction with, they respond to complaints. That period. They don't go out looking for anything. The attitude is if nobody's complaining, there's nothing wrong. And I've had investigators and state regulators. That's basically their position, is that we only respond when somebody complains. If they're not complaining, everything's good. And so I think from a practical standpoint, the likelihood you're going to get people to complain increases when the possibility of the information provided in the appraisal is incomplete. So, if I don't have all of the information about views and construction quality and condition, and these people have gone in and made all kinds of improvements to the property that I'm not aware of, are they going to complain? Well, I think the odds improve that could happen, which then increases my responsibility to make sure I have a pretty good understanding of the property before I complete the assignment. Because if I don't, it's just a risk analysis. Maybe they're not going to be happy, and if they complain, maybe, and you've seen this, I know in your practice, is that very often the element that the appraiser gets turned in for is not the thing they get sanctioned for, and you just have to be careful to make sure you're doing good work.
So, and again, we're going to move on to skill sets. But what you're saying basically is uh, the appraisal reporting form is probably not the issue. It's a lack of proper communication of what you discovered in the appraisal. Am I thinking straight there?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly what we're trying to say.
Okay. All right. Now let's move on to skill sets. The entire industry right now is very much oriented toward bringing people in. And we're not going to get into the demographics of why. I think everybody already knows those. But, a lot of appraisers, they've spoken to you, they've spoken to me, they've been in public forums. They say, okay, I got my, I took my test, I took my class, I took my test, I passed it. I've got a trainee's license and nobody will hire me. So, they're complaining to FHA, they're complaining to the ASB, they're complaining to the government, they're writing letters to senators and representatives. But yet, Craig, I realize that for somebody like you who's been in this business for so long and it is a state cert gen in 3 states, um, uh, uh, the skill set, the simple skill set, the unencumbered skill set, and when I say unencumbered, I mean it's unencumbered by more training and experience. But the unencumbered skill set of merely having passed the trainees, taken the class and passed the trainee's license exam, that really doesn't bring a skill set to the table, does it?
No, and I think the thing that we sometimes, forget is that most of these education and licensing requirements that are set forth are the minimum standard. It's the very bottom. And so I have met the absolute minimum standard to get a credential from the credentialing agency, from the state, most likely. And so at that point, in order to be able to become valuable as a market participant, I've got to have a skill set that my clients actually want. And usually that I think the thing that we are seeing across the board universally is that our clients and intended users want better analytics. They want us to provide better support. They're tired of the appraisal that has a square footage adjustment at 35 bucks a square foot. And when the appraisers asked, well, how was that developed? From my years and years of experience, that's what my trainer told me, or something that is not reasonable in terms of the ability to provide support for the development of that adjustment, and it's not that hard to do. But if I don't have the ability to use some of the tools like Excel or some of the other tools that are out there and understand them, then I think we're getting to a point that our clients are saying, if I'm just going to make stuff up, I can find somebody that can do that. Go find a soothsayer and they'll just give me an AVM and we'll be okay. But if I'm going to engage a professional appraiser, I want them to have a skill set that can provide me with reasonable analysis and support for the conclusions. And so as a trainee, if I'm in that position, I want to find somebody that will train me and provide me with that additional information. I ought to at least have a working knowledge on how to use some of these analytical tools like Excel. I probably want to learn how to do sketching really well. I want to learn how to write reasonably well, so that I bring something to the table that may be useful for the person that's going to train me and get me into the profession.
In talking about Excel, there are plenty of spreadsheet programs out there, and they're all more or less the same. But what level of skill should a new appraiser have in Excel in order to bring something to the table that is going to be attractive to a potential employer?
My belief is that you ought to have at least an intermediate skill set. I ought to be able to know how to write formulas, how to input data so that it can perform some kind of analytical analysis, and things like I've got a set of data. I can go do mins and maxes and means and medians and be able to write those formulas so that I can take some of the data that I'm considering. It's not hard at all to go import a bunch of data from my MLS, take that data, perform some basic analytics on it, and use that data to help develop trends or other results. And when I can learn how to do that, then I bring a skill set that a supervising appraiser is going to value, and I'm far more likely to be hired. And so that's kind of where I would be. I would go look at my community college, and for a relatively small amount of money, I can go take a class and get that skill set and use that for developing some of these tools that would be practical in what I'm doing.
All right. So from a standpoint of Excel, if a trainee can walk into somebody's appraisal office and say, "Hello, I can help solve problems for you," and one of the ways I can do that is because I have mastered Excel to the intermediate level, and you probably don't have any other trainee applicants who can do that, then what I think we're both saying is that newbie, that new appraiser, that trainee wannabe is going to have a greater chance of getting a job or a position than somebody who just walks in and says, "Yeah, I combine my 12 years of washing dishes with my classroom training, and therefore I want to be an appraiser." Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And if I were a trainee or even an appraiser looking to go work for a firm or to improve my situation right now, I think it's going to be more difficult than it has been in the past, because guess what? The amount of new residential assignments has dropped by, I don't know, 40-50%. And so the demand for a supervising appraiser to hire someone when workloads are questionable and maybe have declined is going to present some challenges. But I think if I, as a trainee, can go in and show, maybe I developed some reports. I went into my local MLS and provide, and learned how to do some analytics and some trend analysis. And I've learned how to do some sketches. And I've got, I've got the ability to go in and provide survey analysis so that I can say, listen, I can help you do things like, one of the things that I personally don't like doing is surveys. I actually have an assistant that I have go do that who likes doing that. And so they'll call up and talk to people and get information and put that in a table and put it into our database so that we that in. And so if I'm trying to do a rent survey, or I'm trying to collect rental data, or other information, go chase down trends with new construction permits and things like that, that information is useful and can be something that will help me go write up a really nice area description that can be then attached into an appraisal exhibit describing an area and the general economic trends that affect residential real estate, and have some of this in a little portfolio that I can come in and say, this is what I can help you with. That's going to be far more impressive and more likely to result in an assignment than if I can't do those things. And it might be a situation right now where I'm working with several trainers because maybe they don't have enough work for me to do. Most states will allow you to work with more than one supervisor, and maybe you've got to look at those kinds of things. But that's where I think I would be going if I'm trying to do that. And even if I'm a licensed or certified appraiser, now's the perfect time to improve your skill set. You're not as busy as you used to be. Go improve your skill set so that people want the work product you're producing.
Craig, one last comment before we go. I remember a number of years ago, before you and I had met, I called you out of the blue to ask you some appraisal questions. You didn't have a clue I was, but yet you took about 45 minutes of your time to answer my questions. So the point I'm trying to make is, if someone were to get in touch with you, email, phone, whatever, you would give them your advice and counsel and the wisdom of your experience. So as a result, if someone wanted to get in touch with you with questions such as what we've covered today, how would they best be able to do that?
Email's usually pretty good. I've got a Gmail account that is tied to my phone, so I am more likely to get those kinds of things without getting sent to spam than about anything else. And it's relative. I found with the email, if it gets too complicated, you make mistakes. And so I've made this kind of complicated, but not too bad. It's Value Pro with no E in value. So it's valuepro@gmail.com, VALUPRO@gmail.com. Send me a question, reach out if you want. I'll give you anything I've got. That there's just some really cool tools out there that can improve our efficiency in the spare time that I don't have. And so if there's anything you want to reach out, just say hi. We're happy to do that too. So happy to talk and communicate and do whatever we can to try to help each other out.
Craig, I appreciate it. We lost a little bit of your signal there, so I'll go over your email address again: VALUPRO@gmail.com. Well, Craig, thank you. I know how busy you are, and you are on a little bit of a vacation up there at Bryan Head, trying to avoid the extreme heat of St. George. And you do a lot of work remotely, and and you work in 3 states, and you got a residential division and a commercial division, and people in your office do brokerage. So I know you're busy. So again, let me thank you. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your experience. And again, if anybody has a question of Craig, reach out to ValuePro, VALUPRO @gmail.com. So, Craig, I thank you. My best to your family. And I look forward to the next time we meet.
And that's pretty quick. I think we'll be meeting in Las Vegas at the end of the month. I was down there the other day for the Appraisal Expo for just a few minutes. And so I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, it's about a little over 2 weeks away. So, Craig, again, thank you. And we'll We'll be in touch. And thank you, everybody, for listening to this podcast. We appreciate it. And with that, we're clear.